Welcome to the Farmhouse. I'm Stephanie Spiker.
I'm Candace Worsbowski.
And today we are welcoming in Emmalea Ernest. Emily and her husband own Ernest Fruit Farm in Sussex County, Delaware, but most of Emily's time is filled with being an extension agent with the University of Delaware Extension. She's a fruit and vegetable specialist focusing specifically on lima beans, vegetable plant breeding, and heat stress. So we're going to talk to Emily and hear more about all of her different areas of expertise. But before we get to that, Candace has a little treat for you guys.
I do, and this is about another extension program. This is about a woman working with the Penn State Extension's new canine program. Her name is Abby Hodder, and she is the first ever assistant clinical professor of canine behavioral welfare in the Department of Animal Science at Penn State. And basically, her job is to be a resource for dog breeders across Pennsylvania, and she works with both puppies and older dogs, but mainly puppies. So Abby helps with the socialization and making sure that those puppies are learning correct behaviors, and that of course holds value to both the breeders and the people who will eventually wind up buying and raising these dogs. And if you're in Pennsylvania and you're interested in what Abby is doing, she'll be at Ag Progress Days on August 15th, and she'll also be leading the Penn State Canine Symposium here in Lancaster on August 23rd. And you can read more about Abby and the work that she's doing with Penn State and these puppies at lancasterfarming.com.
Nice. We are very pro-dog on this podcast.
Absolutely, yes.
Both Candace and I have dogs. We are dog people for sure. So pretty cool to have a extension specialist who's all about dogs.
Yeah, and Abby mentioned in the article that she's not just there for like bigger breeders, that if you're a smaller scale breeder, that she is also available.
Nice. Well, let's head back to Delaware Extension now and let's chat with Emily.
Can't wait. Emily, welcome to the Farmhouse. We're very happy to have you here.
Hi, it's great to be with you today.
Right. So, did you always want to work in agriculture?
I think I always wanted to work with plants, and agriculture seemed like a good way to work with plants.
All right. So tell us a little bit about Ernest Fruit Farm and what you guys grow there.
Okay, so Ernest Fruit Farm is my home farm, which is mostly run by my husband because my day job takes a lot of my time. But we grow blueberries and strawberries, and we also grow pole lima beans, so Dr. Martin type lima beans. And all those things get marketed through self-serve roadside stand and orders.
So when you talk about your day job, you're referring to the fact that you're an extension specialist for University of Delaware. For any listeners out there who aren't familiar with extension programs, could you talk about what they are and what extension specialists like yourself do?
Sure. So extension is it's supposed to be the outreach arm of the land-grant university system. So the goal is that in all kinds of areas, extension is taking research results and information generated by the university and getting it to people who will actually use that information in their daily lives. I work in the ag extension side of things. So the goal is to get information about agricultural production to farms and to farmers.
So I feel like, working here at Lancaster Farming, I have talked to a lot of different people in extension over the years, and I don't even remember who it was who said this to me, and I wish I did, but they basically said, you never know what's going to happen when your phone rings. You have no idea what the kind of question's going to be or anything like that. So what has been your most memorable phone call as an extension specialist?
It's true that we do get a lot of questions that are sometimes surprising, and very often they're interesting. But I also talk to the same growers a lot. Delaware is a small state, and a lot of extension folks in Delaware, we work with the same people and the same families a lot. And so when you work with people a lot, then they tend not to surprise you so much. You know what to expect. And I would say that those relationships are what make the job rewarding and the opportunity to interact with people sort of in that way.
I'm sure, like, for the farmers, developing that relationship with your extension specialist is so helpful because I feel like once you have that relationship, maybe it's a little less intimidating to make that phone call to ask a question because, it's no longer like, so you're just calling someone and you don't know what you're doing instead.
A cold call.
Yeah, you're just calling Emily. You guys have talked before. I feel like that's probably a lot nicer for the growers when they have that relationship with you guys.
Yeah, and I think that is the situation that we have in Delaware because of the size of the state. We have a lot of interaction with the same growers.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So, in addition to, helping farmers who might be reaching out for advice or whatnot, you also do a lot of research, particularly on beans. And it looked like specifically a lot of lima bean research. So I just want to ask, why beans? Why lima beans? Why did you choose to pursue research in that particular produce arena?
So lima beans are an important crop for Delaware, and Delaware is one of the few places in the United States where we have a lot of lima bean production. The largest number of acres of lima beans that we have in Delaware are green baby limas for freezing, but people are also growing the pole type Dr. Martens for farm stand sales and some of the other specialty types for local markets. But historically, Delaware has had somewhere in the vicinity of 8 to 50 to 20,000 acres of baby lima beans grown. And the only other place in the US that has that much lima bean acreage is California.
Oh, wow.
And the California production is for dry bean production. So our lima beans in Delaware are harvested at the succulent stage before they dry down, and like you would for green peas. So it's a different production system. It's something that's pretty unique to the Delmarva Peninsula. So that is why the vegetable research program at University of Delaware has done a lot of work on lima beans because they're very important to growers in Delaware. And there's not a lot of information available out there from other places.
That's kind of crazy to think in terms of acreage that it's like Delaware, which is such a small state, and then, and Delaware's doing more than a state like California, which is obviously much larger. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you asked about beans. So why beans? I also do a fair amount of work on snap beans, which are another important fresh market and processing vegetable crop for Delaware. I did my master's at Michigan State working in the dry bean breeding and genetics lab. The bean breeding community is really fun group of people with researchers all over the world working on dry beans, snap beans, and lima beans. And as a graduate student, I decided that if I had the opportunity to keep working with that group of people, that I wanted to keep doing that. So when I started working for University of Delaware and had the opportunity to do work on lima bean breeding, that allowed me to continue to interact with that international group of researchers. So that was a big plus for me.
That's great. It sounds like you kind of found your tribe, the bean tribe.
That's right, the bean tribe.
So, obviously we were talking about lima beans and how it's so important as a crop in Delaware. And I personally am not overly familiar with Delaware's like ag niches. So I was looking into it. And other than lima beans, some of the other things I was seeing was like stuff like watermelon, which is also, a little more of a niche crop. So why do you think these kinds of crops that maybe are not super common to be grown in other states work so well in Delaware?
Well, Delaware has sandy, well-drained soils, so that's very conducive to watermelon production. Watermelons like well-drained and situation. Uh, they're very tolerant of drought. All of our watermelons are grown on raised plastic beds with drip irrigation, so it's not like they're experiencing a lot of drought, but they do like high temperatures and they do like the well-drained soils that we have. We have the well-drained soils also are helpful on the processing vegetables because those crops are harvested mechanically, and the equipment that is used for harvest is large, and you can easily get it stuck if your soils are not well drained. And those crops, it's very important to harvest them in a timely fashion. So processing peas, there's a window when they're ready that lasts a couple of hours.
Oh, wow.
So if it rains and the peas are ready, you want to be able to get in the field as soon as possible. We also have, like I mentioned, processing snap beans and a fair amount of processing sweet corn. There are a few other processing vegetables that are more like smaller acreage, but they're an opportunity for growers because we have the vegetable processors operating in the region.
That's cool. It's cool that it's such a unique place in terms of growing, and like at least for us in Pennsylvania, it's like right next to us, and you're doing all these cool things that aren't necessarily happening as much in our backyard. So that's cool. Yeah. So I know you also work with plant breeding and doing work in that sector. So can you kind of just explain to our listeners the importance of plant breeding, and then what are some exciting things happening now within the realm of plant breeding?
So I kind of think of it this way. A new variety is one of the easiest technologies for a grower to implement. If we have varieties that are resistant to diseases, then we reduce the amount of fungicides that need to be sprayed. The grower plants the variety, and then that management decision is taken care of. You won't have the disease problem if the variety is resistant. Same goes for abiotic stress. A lot of my breeding program has focused on breeding for abiotic stress tolerance, especially heat tolerance for lima beans, because the varieties that we had been using commercially are not very heat tolerant. And so during our sort of July time period, we have a lot of problems with heat stress and pod set not happening because it's too hot. So we can't do a lot to change the weather. So what we need to do is change the varieties that we're growing. And I think dealing with abiotic stresses, especially heat, which we can't do much to fix, breeding new varieties that are more tolerant to those conditions is the best solution and the easiest solution for growers to use.
I'm glad that you mentioned your work on abiotic stress tolerance, especially heat, because that was literally what my next question was about. I guess, do you find that there's a lot of interest out there, either academically or from consumers or growers, for more heat tolerant varieties?
So for lima beans, it was probably 10, 12 years ago now that I did a needs assessment survey of our lima bean growers and asked what is their biggest production issue, and heat stress was the top of the list. So at that point, they were recognizing that they were seeing yield loss because of heat stress. With some crops, you can adjust the planting dates to avoid heat, but with processing vegetables, the goal is to have a continuous supply to the processing plant. So if you only are planting during the window when you're going to get the best yields and they're guaranteed, then you're not going to have a supply of lima beans to be frozen starting the beginning of August through October. You're narrowing down that window. And this is an issue with vegetables that's not an issue with grain crops because vegetables are perishable. So we're dealing with this situation. We're trying to get a continuous supply of something. This is also an issue for fresh market growers who want a continuous supply of, say, green beans throughout the summer, but you can't get green beans in the middle to end of July because there's been so much heat stress. So we had the demand from growers to start looking at this issue. And we've looked at it from various perspectives. In the lima beans, we've been actually breeding for heat stress. In some of the other crops, we've been looking at other ways of trying to deal with heat stress. But that we definitely, from both fresh market and processing growers, we're hearing from people that this was a problem that they needed a solution for.
Yeah, I'd be curious, because I know obviously you're dealing with the beans side of things, but I mean, I would imagine it's got to be an issue that's of interest to farmers across the board, because it's got to be affecting more and more people out there.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, if this was something that growers were asking you about, you said almost 10 years ago, it's gotten even hotter the past 10 years. Climate change has definitely had its impact. So what are some of the ways that climate change has really changed how growers in the Mid-Atlantic have to farm?
So we have had a lot of irrigated acreage on Delmarva in the past, partly because we have available groundwater, partly because we have sandy soils. So if you don't have irrigation available, then, as they say, you're 2 or 3 days away from a drought. So the well-drained soils are good in some ways and problem in others. But in the time that I have been in Delaware, which is about 20 years now, more and more irrigation systems have been installed. We really do not have too many people even growing agronomic crops on dryland soils. There is still some, and virtually all the vegetables are irrigated. When I first started working in Delaware, there were some lima beans that were grown on unirrigated ground, but that doesn't happen anymore. So people have been making sure that they have irrigation available. I'd say that's probably the biggest thing that folks have done on a large scale. And then some people have adjusted the times when they're planting different vegetable crops. Some planting windows have become unavailable. And then another thing that has happened for snap beans, for example, there are some heat tolerant varieties available, and those varieties are being used during the window when they're going to be most useful.
Great. So what's your advice to young people who are interested in getting into agriculture?
So my advice is to find yourself a job doing something in agriculture as soon as you can, so that you get some experience and you know what it's like. I spent my middle and high school years working for a greenhouse business, which isn't directly related to what I do now, but it made me pretty good at growing things in the greenhouse, which has been very beneficial, as I have done a lot of research projects starting back when I was a graduate student and continuing to now. So any way that you can to get hands-on experience, that's probably my best advice.
No, it's solid advice, and I like that you involve like middle and high school students. Like it's never too early, and there are certainly always ways to get involved.
Yes. So I have usually about 6 young people who work for me every summer in the research program. And I have had various high school students over the years. I have 2 high school students working for me this summer. So it's always fun, and it's amazing to see how much they learn.
Yeah, that's very cool. Got to start them young. So that actually brings us to our final question, which is, as we always joke, the big one, which is, what does being a woman in ag mean to you?
I guess I would say that as a woman in agriculture, obviously I have a lot of male colleagues. I also have a fair number of female colleagues. Um, and I have found that things and teams really seem to work best when you have a mix of men and women working together and each bringing different perspectives and skills. Um, and that is actually something I also like about my job, is being able to work with both men and women and um, working together.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with us.
Yep. Well, thanks. It was great to chat with you, ladies.
It was wonderful talking to Emily about her work as an extension specialist and, doing research with the University of Delaware on lima beans and all the other beans. And I'm glad that she's, getting in there and doing the work to figure out how we are going to continue successfully farming in the face of a changing climate, how we are going to make sure that our plants are going to continue to produce food for us, when it's continuing to get hotter and hotter. But one thing that came up that I thought maybe we could talk about briefly, because it also came up, I believe, in our last episode when we talked to Ashley about her time with Rye Mead Farms, is the concept of the land grant program. So Steph, could you tell us, what is the land grant program and why is it important?
Yeah, so if you were not aware, every state in the U.S. has a land grant university. For us in Pennsylvania, it is Penn State, which is where I went. For Delaware, it's University of Delaware. And as we talked with Ashley in New Jersey, it's Rutgers University. Basically, land grant universities were designated to receive federal funding. And a lot of these were designated long time ago, like 1800s or so. And this federal funding went to these universities to specifically help them teach mostly agriculture. There was some other stuff involved, but a lot of it was founded with the basis of agriculture being a focus. And what then kind of stemmed from that was later there was federal funding enacted that these land grant universities would have extension programs. And extension programs, while they are tied to the university, right? So here it's Penn State Extension, in Delaware it's University of Delaware Extension, etc. It's tied to the university, but it is open to anyone. Anyone can use extension services to get advice or talk to them about questions they have about growing lima beans, for example. And I think people don't realize how broad extension services are. You can find so much information. I know
cooking information,
yes,
for
exactly.
example. Yeah, have a question about canning or about like the best way to preserve your tomatoes. Extension's got you.
Yeah. Gardening, right? Most extensions have master gardener programs as well, which they know everything about gardening. Personally, I'm most familiar, obviously, with Penn State Extension because A, I live in Pennsylvania, and B, I am a Penn Stater. But recently, I know Penn State Extension actually had a class about healthy cooking to help with diabetic diets. Like, you can find so much. So whatever state you live in, it really doesn't matter. Look up what your extension program is, and I bet you there is some sort of class or webinar or something that you're interested in. This is a huge resource for farmers, obviously. You have dairy specialists, you have crop specialists, you have beef specialists, all of the things, right? So, but yeah, do some research, whatever state you're in, figure out what your land grant university is, figure out what your extension program is, and check out some of the cool stuff they do.
I would also add, since it's fair season, that a lot of times extension pops up at your local county fair. They might not have anyone there in person, but they will often have booths or just kind of a setup with, takeaway information. Maybe it's a pamphlet. I know at my hometown fair, there is always a station very close to where they judge all of like the cooking stuff or the baking. And you can often find fun recipes at their station. They've been all around you this entire time. You just have to look.
Additionally, speaking of county fairs, if you're going to the fair, you're going to see a lot of 4-Hers, and 4-H is actually a program that's run through Extension. So land-grant universities have their hands in a lot of different things, which is pretty cool. So now you know, the more you know.
Okay, that wraps it up for us this week. Thank you all for listening. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. If you really liked this episode, please consider leaving us a review.
If you have any questions or any thoughts about this episode or the podcast in general, you can send us an email at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com.
You can also find us on social media at Lancaster Farming on most platforms.
Thank you again for listening and visiting us at the farmhouse. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Candace.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
This episode of The Farmhouse is copyright 2024 by Lancaster Farming Newspapers, part of the Steinman Communications family.
It was written by Stephanie Spiker and Candace Wierzbowski. It was produced by Eric Kurlock and Matt Lee. The music you've heard throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.